Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything
except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're coming to you from the studios of 91.7 KALW, San Francisco's oldest, most innovative public radio station.
Continuing conversations that begin at Philosopher's Corner on the Stanford campus.
And from there, they migrate to the air via KALW, and from the air, they migrate to the internet via our blog, theblog.philosophytalk.org. Go check it out.
Ken, before plunging into today's topic, let me wish Jean-Paul Sartre happy 100th birthday. And Jean-Paul, if they allow radios in whatever circle of Hades is reserved for philosophers,
or heaven,
or heaven, we thank you for all your great works. Today, we're talking about global poverty and international aid. Ken, wouldn't you agree that we all have a duty to give till it hurts?
A duty to give. I'm not so sure about that. A duty means you can't escape doing it. I think it would be nice if everybody in the world was well off. There weren't any suffering, starving people. That would be a really nice world. But am I obligated to do that? Look, I have lots of demands. My children, my family, my country. I'm not sure I have a duty.
Okay, so there's one philosophical issue that we've isolated. Even if one is generally in favor of aid, both individual and from larger units like governments, to the poor around the world, is that a duty, an obligation, or something that some philosophers call supererogatory, above and beyond duty, but a good thing to do? Now, a second issue is why? What are we after here? Are we egalitarians? Do we think that the goal should be that eventually everyone in the world has the same call on the world's resources?
Well, look, again, I hate to sound like a hard-nosed, cold-hearted person, but look, people matter. People's suffering matter, but some people's suffering matters more to me. I'm not going to make my son's education be a secondary, diminished kind of thing in order that somebody over in some distant part of the world have more food or something like that. My son's education matters more to me than the suffering of some distant person.
Well, Ken, you shouldn't feel bad. The world needs cold-hearted people. I mean, those of us who have kind of a higher sensitivity to the sufferings of others feel better because we can contrast ourselves with cold-hearted people like you.
Yeah, right.
But all kidding aside, don't you think that equality, egalitarianism, everybody having pretty much this, I mean, after all, it's one world, one atmosphere, one supply of water. Shouldn't we all eventually have an equal share on it, and shouldn't we work towards that goal?
Maybe. I'm not so sure. But, our roving philosophical reporter, Amy Standen, went out and put that very question to an economist. She files this report.
Suppose a poverty-stricken farmer from Sudan showed up at your door and asked you for half of everything you have. Should you give it to him? Maybe you would, or maybe not. Maybe that huge disparity between what you have and what he has is a good thing, or at least a necessary one.
Suppose we had a rule which was that everyone had to share all of their income equally with the other 6.5 billion minus one people on the planet.
Ethan Ligon is an associate professor of economics at UC Berkeley.
I'm willing to assert that the resources to be divided would be much smaller. The entire pie would shrink dramatically. There's this real tension between having inequality and allowing people economic mobility as a way of providing incentives to work and prosper and, educate oneself. The reason people do those things principally has to do with trying to improve their own lot in life. If in fact we had a huge tax on the stuff that people produced, I think it is a consequence of human nature that not very much would be produced.
In other words, if greed and ambition weren't there to keep us working and investing and constantly trying to earn more, there wouldn't be as much to go around, and everyone would suffer.
We could imagine a world in which everyone started off exactly equal, that they had the same wealth, the same education, all those things were the same. We would need, I think, to encourage those people to work by offering them rewards if they did work. So long as all the risks associated with that kind of behavior were shared, people would tend not to engage in them. because the returns from undertaking effort or risky activities would be relatively small. We can think about what the optimal distribution is, but it very certainly isn't that everyone should have the same amount of stuff all the time.
So the question is, how much inequality do we tolerate? Every day, some 3,000 children under 5 die from malaria, a preventable disease. Is that the price we pay for the great wealth generated in the United States and other rich countries?
It's examples like inexpensive treatments of malaria that aren't provided right now that make me think that the current distribution isn't right. If there were a social planner who had the welfare of all the world's citizens at heart, it's hard to imagine that that person wouldn't choose to invest in mosquito nets to prevent malaria.
If providing mosquito nets to poor countries is one tiny way of redistributing the world's wealth, what's next? How far should we go to tip the scales? For Philosophy Talk, this is Amy Standen.
Thanks, Amy, for that report. Amy found an economist from Berkeley here in the wonderful Bay Area, one of the richest places on Earth, who's not all that impressed with the arguments for equality, although admittedly at the end he admitted that a lot of real inequalities that exist should be alleviated. I'm John Perry. With me is Ken Taylor.
And to join us to help us talk about this topic is somebody who is actually deeply committed to equality. That's Peter Singer. He's professor of bioethics at Princeton University. He's the author of, most recently, The President of Good and Evil, The Ethics of George W. Bush, and pertinent to our current discussion, he's also the author of One World, The Ethics of Globalization. Peter, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Hi, Peter. John Perry here.
Hi, John.
We're all philosophers, and our discussion is no doubt going to get abstract and very general. But let me encourage you to start out on a really concrete level. Tell us about all the poverty around the world. Pick out one or two cases that are most compelling for the general thesis that Americans in America ought to be giving a heck of a lot more than they do to alleviate these situations.
Well, I think we all know that there are a huge number of people who are desperately poor. And, you can take as an example the fact that there are people who simply cannot provide enough for their families to eat, that they cannot provide the most basic kind of health care, or that they can't obtain clean water, as an example. So let's just take that. There are people who, generally it's women whose job it is to gather water in villages, who might have to spend 3 hours a day walking from their home to a source of water, and that source of water is probably going to be a stream which maybe other villages upstream use for washing, or maybe there are animals, cattle that have go and take water from the stream and defecate and urinate in it. So it's probably not a healthy source of water, and yet that's the best they can do. They have to then go home. If they've got enough fuel, they might boil it to sterilize it. But then that means they have to gather fuel if they don't have that. So
now, Peter, that sounds pretty bad. But let me just clarify something here. There's disparities in lifestyles around the world that really don't involve much suffering. For example, if I go to Norway or Sweden, they have a better lifestyle than we do. But when I'm back in America, that doesn't mean I'm suffering, because we don't have all the stuff that people in Sweden have, or as good a social system as people in Norway. To what extent are there, to how many, and what numbers are we talking about, of people who are not just enjoying appreciably second-rate lifestyles, according to some standard relative to Americans, but really don't have enough to be leading a decent human life? We talking about 1 million people, 1 billion people? How many?
We're probably talking about 1 billion to perhaps 1.2 billion, according to World Bank figures. There's 1.2 billion people who are living on less than the purchasing power equivalent of $1 a day. Actually, because of inflation, I think it's now $1 and 8 cents a day, something like that. But remember, that's the purchasing power equivalent. So don't say to yourself, oh, yes, but I've traveled to these countries and it's amazing what you can get for $1. Because they don't actually have a US dollar. They have the purchasing power equivalent. They may have, depending on the rate of exchange, 30 or 40 cents US a day to live on.
Peter, I want to ask you another kind of factual kind of question. The woman you were just talking about has to go long distance to get dirty water. I mean, why is that? I mean, how costly would it be to put potable, water, a nice water system, sewage treatment and all that? Is that like a big deal?
It's not a very big deal, and that's why I've chosen this example, because it illustrates the disparity, right? Because I know someone who's actually worked with an organization, Oxfam.
Right.
Oxfam America is the American affiliate of the International Oxfam Group. And he actually said he wanted to do something like put in a well in a village. This is a part of Ethiopia where these conditions occur. How much was it going to cost? They said $10,000, we can do it. So he donated $10,000, and he didn't just write a check. He actually went out there later to see the well and talk to the villagers. And so for $10,000, which is something that, most of us can really afford, if not to give in 1 year, maybe to save up over a couple of years, depending, what we earn, you can put in a well which will give a whole village of people, several hundred people, clean water for probably, for indefinitely, forever. So, they just don't have those sorts of sums to bring in, the equipment to do the digging, to get the well sort of properly set up so that they can maintain it. This is not something that requires an engine or anything like that, or, it's not that we're making them dependent on oil. It's a hand well that they can hand pump. And that's really all it takes. And you then may save some hundreds of women from having to go and get water from their family every day. Plus, of course, it's a healthier supply of water. It's cleaner. It's not polluted.
Peter, let me push a little on the factual issue here. So we've got about 1 billion people, that's about a sixth of the world, that is really at this level of grinding poverty.
Right.
Now, how many people in the world, I think this would include most Americans, most British, many Europeans, are really at a level where they've got enough extra that they really could be helping? Is it another
it's
billion
actually a
there?
fairly similar figure. Yeah. It's pretty close to 1 billion around that figure as well. That's in the developed world. It's probably actually more, because what we tend to do is, we think of, as you said, Americans and Europeans and Australians and whatever. But what we forget is that actually within some of these countries, in India or Brazil or whatever, there's a pretty large, comfortable middle class as well. So you've got to add all them in. You certainly get 1 billion or,
and
a little bit over.
Not only is there a large middle class, I mean, I spent some time as an exchange student in Brazil. There's a tremendously wealthy set of small but very wealthy upper class in places like Brazil. I don't know about India, but in Brazil.
In
India too, especially now, we've got a lot more millionaires now.
So in order to kind of frame the rest of the show, we can say, well, we've got about 1 billion people in grinding poverty, and we've got about 1 billion people who looks like could afford to give a substantial amount to help those people in grinding poverty. What are the philosophical questions?
This looks like really easy, right?
Yeah, but the question is, the philosophical question maybe isn't whether this should be done, but what reasons, is it an obligation or just something that would be good to do? And also, what are different philosophical theories say about it? Is the utilitarian going to say something different than the Kantian? And then there's the question of, what do we owe as individuals and what do we owe as states and governments? We're going to look at all of those.
Well, yeah, we'll dig into those questions. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Our guest is Peter Singer. Our topic, global poverty and international aid.
Are we obliged to help people in faraway places we'll never see? If so, how much of your own wealth and comfort are you willing to give? Would you be willing to give half your income away to the world's poorest? Why or why not?
We'll take your calls after the break. Philosophy Talk. We'll be right back.
But I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one.
John Lennon and Imagine. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're discussing global poverty and international aid. Join us. How much are you willing to give? Should we, as Peter Singer sometimes says, give till it hurts? And what constitutes hurt? The number, 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134.
Outside the Bay Area, you can call toll-free at 1-800-525-9917. Finally, you can email us at comments@philosophytalk.org. Our guest is Peter Singer of Princeton University.
Peter, I want you to imagine that I'm a reasonably well-off American. I'm kind of trapped in my dogmatic slumber. I haven't thought about this stuff very much. You know, I'm concerned about my community, my family. I want you to convince me that I owe it to that suffering African woman to give her some aid.
You can assume he's a philosophically
I'm a
reflective
person, but
dogmatic.
talk to me.
Just haven't reflected on this particular issue.
Yeah,
yet,
I
is
haven't
that it?
reflected. I'm kind of in my dogmatic slumber. Wake me up.
Right. Well, I guess the first thing I want to say is, are you prepared to acknowledge that this woman's problems, that say the fact that she has to walk 3 hours a day to provide water that isn't safe, that she has to watch her children get diarrhea from the water, maybe she can't afford health care to provide anything when they do get diarrhea. She's constantly worried that they may die from it because although it's a pretty simple condition, millions of children in the third world do die from simple conditions like diarrhea. Does that affect you? Do you agree that it's a bad thing that this woman is suffering in this way? It's a bad thing if her children die and she grieves from their death.
I mean, I
That's
suppose.
the first step.
Okay, so I'm an open-minded, caring person. Sure, it moves me. When you tell me the story, I say, gee, that's really bad. That's really too bad. That's a sad world.
Yeah, check. It's a bad
Okay.
thing. Step 2.
Check. Good. Okay. Step 2. Do you spend money on things that are, you have to admit are not terribly important for you? For example, do you go out in restaurants with your partner and maybe spend $50 or $60 for a meal? Do you go to the opera or theater or things like that where you might be spending $60 or more for a ticket?
I go to the opera. I go to dinner. And when you say not terribly important, I love going to the opera. I love a fine meal. It adds enjoyment to my life. What do you mean not terribly important?
Well, I guess the question really is, suppose that instead of going at just, let's say you cut back once a month on these events. You still have some, but you cut back once a month. Would that make a really big difference to your life, to the quality of your life?
Suppose, can you cut back from your $200 bottles of wine to, the kind of like $3 bottle of wine I drink?
Oh, well, I said I was reasonably
let's go
well
up to
off.
8 or 9. Okay, we can be reasonable here.
Yeah, plus I said I was reasonably well off. $200 bottle of wine. I don't do that. Look, I don't feel wealthy. You tell me that I'm well off relative to the rest of the world, but I look around me and I don't feel like wealthy.
This is something I say to my students, for example, right? Students tend not to have as much money as you. I say, do you spend $1 or $1.50 buying a can of soda or something else when you've got safe, clean water available that you could drink? Because I think that's a luxury. I think spending money on even just sodas when there's water around that's safe to drink is a luxury. And the amount that you spend is probably all these people, this specific woman we're talking about in Africa, for example, has in a day. In fact, it's more than she has in a day because, as I was saying at the beginning, that's a real dollar or $1.50. She just has the purchasing power equivalent of that.
Okay, you moved our emotions with this woman's plight. We're getting philosophical here. Now, I'll give you the second one. Ken may just be living there in Los Altos Hills, very close to the bone, but I myself, there's a good 10-15% at least of what I spend in a week that is luxury. What's the next step? Why should I give that up? I do enjoy it to help this woman that I'll never see.
Well, you will never see her probably, but if you know that you are helping her with something really important, you're preventing something really bad happening. You think about what it's like for a mother to watch her child die from a preventable illness, for example. You're preventing something really bad happening, and all you have to do is give up one of these, really fairly trivial luxuries in your life. I think that it's not too hard to say, well, yeah, that's something that I really ought to do. If I don't do that, I'm being indifferent to the suffering of someone else just because I don't see her, just because she's far away and off my radar screen in that
way. That's pretty moving. But look, let's suppose I'm a utilitarian and I say, these things are very difficult, Peter. How do I know that actually taking that money that I was going to spend on opera tickets and sodas and devoting it to alleviating the plight of this woman in Africa, let's say, or Bangladesh or someplace, is actually a good thing. We know that inoculations and a lot of the things that look like terrific things have really historically made things worse, led to overpopulation and diminished resources. From a utilitarian point of view, I want to do bring about the best result for the most people in the long run. Should I really let my emotions be dictated? Maybe I should listen to that economist that our roving philosophical reporter talked about and think, it's maybe necessary to the world's health, economic health, that I go to the opera. What do you think of that argument?
Not much.
Me either,
but
John.
I do think that. But let me just say, I do think that you ought to be thinking about the consequences. I do think you ought to be trying to do the most good in the long run. When you say that, you're definitely going down the right track. But it's not a matter of getting carried away by your emotions. It's a matter of finding out the facts and finding out what you really can do. Now, I didn't actually disagree with that economist. You said at the start that I'm committed to equality. I'm not really, and certainly for the purpose of this discussion, I don't think we need to get into equality at all. We need to get into the idea of preventing something really bad happening at a very small cost to yourself. That's all we need to do. And we need to be sure, of course, that it is going to be effective in the long run. But, if you're worried about global population, there are things that you can do which will have an impact on that.
I'm going to let some of our callers in on this conversation. William in Belvedere is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, William.
Yes, thank
What's
you
your
very
comment or
much.
question?
I really enjoy your show because it stimulates thought about things that I don't normally think about. But
thank you.
not but.
Here comes the hard part.
But.
No, in that connection, your roving reporter and the person with whom she spoke, and also the issues that you've been addressing, seem to deal with a decision about whether to do something to help others or not to do things to help others. That's sort of the split, like it's either positive or it's neutral. Now let me go to the other choice, which is, let's add on to that whether to do bad to other people. Now, that may seem ridiculous, but let me give you an example. Government action is, at least theoretically, the collective expression of the whole group of us. Now, with respect to governmental policy, take the situation of either giving aid, say, to Africa, as an example. That would be the giving something to other people.
Right.
Neutral, not giving aid to Africa.
Spending it on our own schools or something silly like that, yeah.
Or maybe not, but not taking positive action towards, say, the poor in Mexico or something like that. But let's look at the other thing, which in fact is actually very often done. For instance, we subsidize our farmers, who then are able to produce corn, and it's sold for a low rate of price. We give them essentially free water, etc. They
dump it on the world's market,
and then that drives the Mexican farmer off of the land.
William, I get your point, and I think it's a good one. And I might put it like this: Isn't Professor Singer kind of tilting at a windmill when there's something more practical to be done? If we could just get America and Americans to quit hurting people in the third world, that would be a big moral accomplishment. Forget about helping them.
What do you think, Peter?
Look, it would be a great accomplishment, and I totally agree with the caller about the subsidies, but I don't understand why you say that's more practical. I mean, I'm sitting here, I've got a checkbook. All I have to do is write a check to send it to, let's say, Oxfam America, find their address on the website, and mail it, and they do something useful with it. That seems to me extremely practical. You say we should stop having subsidies. Right, so I'm going to vote for someone who is against subsidies. Okay, but that's not going to do it. If you live in New Jersey or New York, they're probably against subsidies anyway, but it's the people out there, in the electorates where the farmers are getting the subsidies who care about it. So actually, I'm pretty powerless on this issue. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm completely powerless. I'm certainly going to support organizations that try to stop these unfair subsidies, the way the U.S. is hurting these countries. But I think in addition to that, I can do something much more immediate, and I think I ought to.
Peter, I think we have a caller who either agrees or disagrees with you on just this point. Julian in San Francisco is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Julian.
Hello. I'd like to challenge the assumption that I have a duty to help anyone outside my family whom I have voluntarily chosen to help. And I believe it was Ayn Rand who posed the example of a person who walks by a well,
Mm-hmm.
and there's someone at the bottom of the well drowning, and all this person has to do is drop a rope down into the well. And she asked whether or not the person has a moral obligation to do that. And she concludes, no. I'd like to know what you think of that.
I think that's totally horrible, I have to say. And I have read Ayn Rand, and I don't think her arguments are any good. We could go into a lot of detail about why she says that. But I think that we do have an obligation to prevent some great harm occurring when we can do so at small cost to us. That seems to me pretty basic.
The question is about. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Our guest is Peter Singer, author of One World: The Ethics of Globalization. You can join our discussion by calling 415-841-4134. Pete, but I think you're right that Ayn Rand thing is silly. I mean, if it's no cost to me, I think almost everyone would agree. If it's no cost to me to help another person, right, then I should do it. I mean, if they're suffering, I should do it if it's no cost. But now, add some cost. Here's the question: how much cost should I have to bear to myself or to those near and dear in order to help those more distant from me? Now, if all people kind of matter equally, then a little harm to these people is worth a little benefit, some benefit to those people. But if those near and dear matter more, then it's harder for those distant people to get into my moral calculus. So the question, I think, is why should those distant people matter as much to those who are near and dear to me? I mean, by what argument?
I think they matter just as much because if we put ourselves in their position, we can see that the African mother who has to watch her child die suffers just as much as, I would, or someone else near to me, my neighbor, would, if they had to watch their child die. And I think that when we think ethically, we should try and basically abstract from our own selfish position and universalize. This is something a lot of different ethicists, utilitarians, but also Kantians and many others have said. We should universalize and put ourselves in the position of others and look at it from their point of view. So that's why I think at this, general ethical level, strangers do matter as much. Of course, there's a lot of other issues you have to ask about. How can I be sure that I'm really helping them, and how can I be sure I'm not reducing
Peter,
incentives and so on? Yeah,
Peter, doesn't that point of view allow an argument for the Ayn Rand side of things? I mean, I don't want to say she's silly. Some of her examples are a bit silly. Well, look, I mean, if I'm supposed to not be, you might say everybody's suffering around the world should matter the same to me. I don't know if you quite committed yourself to that, but let's start with that premise. Now, that every minute of every day you could be doing something to alleviate the suffering of somebody who's as bad off as that man down the well. But you don't do that. You choose to invest in yourself. What your time is basically starts out being yours. Then you see the man down the well and you say, well, why, if I accept Singer's premise, that guy down the well shouldn't be any more important to me than somebody that's suffering in Nigeria that I could have taken my morning and tried to help. So aren't you playing with fire there when you push this premise about the distance and relations not mattering?
Look, if for some reason the cost of saving the guy down the well is that you can't save two people in Nigeria, then you should leave the guy down the well and save the two people in Nigeria. But that's not the situation. In the example, you just had to drop the rope and he could come out, so you can drop the rope.
Now,
and actually you can save him with greater certainty than you can. It's even easier than helping the people in Nigeria.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's true. But some people might think that if you, that your position that you shouldn't save the guy down the well if it would take up the time that you could be using to save two people in Nigeria is almost as implausible as Ayn Rand's position.
Well, the one thing I should say, I think this would be exhausting, thinking, who can I save? Where should I devote my energy? It's like I've got this relentless obligation to calculate where I can best devote my energies to the perfection of the world. And that just seems exhausting to me.
Not the perfection of the world, okay? Let's get this right. Yeah. What we're talking about is alleviating great suffering. That's a long way from the perfection of the world.
That's certainly true. Let's let some callers in here. Frank in Berkeley's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Frank.
Thank you, gentlemen. You always talk about the rope is funny because I think it would make a great deal of difference if you already had the rope with you or if you had to go and buy one, that would make a great deal of difference to me. I'll tell you that right now.
Good point. Perfectly fair.
In all of this discussion, all of this purging of guilt by millionaire white boys like Bob Geldof, they failed to realize one thing, that the poorest countries of the world, the people there basically breed like rats. Oh. And an entire service industry has built up around people like the United Nations is just the very beginning of that.
I think your point of view is pretty clear. You're very articulate. That helping people that are going to overpopulate the world isn't such a good thing. Let's get some reactions to that.
Peter,
thanks for your call.
World population is a problem, right, Peter? I mean,
it's an issue. I mean, fortunately, actually, population growth is slowing down. What your caller said really isn't right. And the countries that have made it, if you like, a little bit to a slightly less desperate level of poverty, their population has been reducing dramatically, so that the predictions of people like Paul Ehrlich 30 years ago about the population bomb actually are not coming true. The population is still a problem, but it's not, he was predicting famines that would have occurred, wide-scale famines around the world long before now, and they haven't. And one of the things we can do by helping people is to help them to get control of their fertility. And there's lots of evidence showing that if you provide education, particularly if you provide education for girls, with every year of education that a girl gets, the chances of her having a large family fall. Yeah. So that, that's one thing we can do. We can provide just a few years of elementary education for girls, and it will have an impact years down the line in the number of children that they have.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Our guest is Peter Singer of Princeton University, author of One World, The Ethics of Globalization.
Tell us, how much money should our government give to poor countries? Who should give and who should get help first? The poorest Americans, should they be to whom we give our wealth? Or should we pick out the poorest of the poor all over the whole globe?
Philosophy Talk will be right back.
USA for Africa, singing We Are the World, lyrics by Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie. Bruce Springsteen and Ray Charles were the voices you heard. I want your appreciation out there in Radio Land for not playing Small World. I'm John Perry. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything
except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. We're talking about global poverty and international aid. Join us by calling 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134.
Outside the Bay Area, call toll-free 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Or you can email us comments at philosophytalk.org.
Steve in San Francisco's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Steve.
Hi, good afternoon.
What's your comment or question?
Well, I've been studying the poverty problem for 30 years, and basically we've agreed to have a money system, but we forgot to make sure that everybody has some. That's like putting Robinson Crusoe on his island without any tools from the shipwreck. And since the money is the tool of the capitalist society, when you become capitalist in the capitalist society, it's a pretty tough go.
Okay, so what's your solution to this problem, Steve?
Well, first of all, sex and money are important in life, aren't they? And how many classes in either one of those subjects did you get in school?
Well, that's a good point. But now, do you think the federal government governments ought to make sure everybody in the world has some money?
The governments are kind of a failure everywhere. But let me go on a little bit. It's a distribution problem. Everybody ought to get some money to keep it together. I think everybody in the world ought at least get $1 a day, and money would come from the World Bank. In the U.S., we should all get $50 a day. The money would come from the Federal Reserve Bank, right direct to your account.
So Steve,
$50 will get you a flop and one hot.
So Steve, thanks for the call. You're advocating a kind of global guaranteed income or something like
global safety net.
So Peter Singer, what do you think of that? idea?
I think that's something we should work towards. I don't know that we're quite ready for it, but yes, I think in principle we should have some kind of safety net or security so that there is a guarantee that people don't have to actually starve for want of money. But,
let me ask you a question along this line. Look, we've been talking about individual obligations. What should I give to the woman over in Africa? What do I owe it? But, there are also these governments. And
right.
Some people think, I guess I tend to think, we constitute a government. It's an instrument for securing our well-being, our peace and prosperity. But, you could have an argument, and I think you, Peter, probably would have an argument, that we should also view our government as an instrument for guaranteeing and securing the peace and prosperity of the world at large. But why is that? I mean, since we make this government for our benefit, why should our government be deeply concerned, except for maybe pragmatic reasons, about the rest of the world?
Look, I think we do have governments for pragmatic reason. I mean, we didn't really make it. I didn't make it. You don't have any choice. There's going to be a government, whatever you want. But the government does exist as an agency that collects money through taxation. It collects it in a reasonably fair way. It's reducing that, I think, in my view now. But, generally it collects more from people who earn more and less from the people who can give less. I think that's right. So I would think it's good if it uses that money in an effective way to address these problems we're talking about, the greatest poverty in the world. But, I mean, the problem is that, most Americans imagine that their government does a lot in this respect. In fact, the United States, as a percentage of its gross national product, gives the least of all the developed countries, of all the OECD nations, the rich nations in the world. The United States gives the smallest percentage of its wealth of any nation. It gives about 15 cents in every $100 the country earns, whereas the United Nations suggested giving 70 cents in every $100, and there's about half a dozen nations that actually exceed that. The U.S. is sort of way, way below it.
So we have an email here that's kind of interesting and on this topic, slightly different angle. It says, "Hi guys, excellent topic. Please don't forget to include in your discussion something about the history of colonialism and economic imperialism that has shaped and continues to shape the drastic disparities in the global distribution of wealth." That's from Gregory in San Francisco. So isn't there, aside from a kind of forward-looking best for the world motivation here, also obligations in virtue of the damage we've done? I would say not only in terms of colonialism and economic imperialism, but also the fact that everybody around the world is dealing with an ecology that has been damaged by the rich nations, and especially including America.
I think that's a separate argument. I think it can be made out. You would, really need to look at each nation's record as a colonial power and what it did.
I suppose one might say America shouldn't be in first place because we weren't the worst colonial power. But, I believe. What's that Commonwealth you belong to?
Wait a minute, you guys. I got to have a little bit of dissent here. There are lots of screwed up countries around the world. Lots of screwed up governments that made really bad economic choices, right? Take the communist Chinese. I mean, China's coming on now like great gangbusters, but we weren't responsible for the degradations that Mao's Cultural Revolution wrought, or that Stalin's state planning wrought. I mean, the world's partly messed up because countries messed themselves up. Isn't that right? We did some problems. I'm not denying we had some major role in screwing up the world, but we didn't have the sole and exclusive role, right? We didn't make economic choices for the Soviet bloc, for the Chinese,
the British and the French.
Cambodians.
The British and the French helped us screw up the world.
So did the countries around the world.
Some of the countries screwed themselves up, or they had governments through no fault of their own, because of course they didn't get to vote for Mao, so they had governments that screwed them up. There's no question about that. But sometimes, of course, we're also complicit because we deal with these governments. I mean, look at Nigeria that we were talking about. We were buying oil from Nigeria. We were getting a lot of oil from Nigeria. And who were we paying for the oil? We were paying, the dictator of Nigeria, just because he happened to be there and had more guys with guns who'd managed to seize power.
Right.
We shouldn't be doing that.
I agree with you, but I still wonder how morally good would we be? I mean, how much would we have achieved if we just had cleaner hands? That is, we stopped screwing up, we stopped interfering, we stopped supporting repressive dictatorships, and we said, "Okay, world, go flourish." Why would that not be enough?
Well, but if I can intervene here, Peter, in a way, has already answered that. If you've got $10,000 check to write, you're going to have a lot easier time buying a well for somebody in Nigeria with that $10,000 than getting a single congressman to vote towards America not screwing up the world.
I know, but I'm just imagining. Suppose we could not get so that we're not screwing up the world. How would that not be enough? Morally?
Well, it would be a great start, but I think there would probably still be some people who, through no fault of their own and not through our intervention, were desperately poor. They had no land. Perhaps the rains had changed or something like that. And in fact, again, here, maybe that's our fault because of global warming that the rains had changed. But let's just say, for the sake of the example, it isn't. I still think we ought to help them, even if it's just their random bad luck and we had nothing to do with it. If we can help them at small cost to us, I think we ought to.
Edmundo in Oakland's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Edmundo.
Thanks. There's 3 points I'd like to make.
Make them very quickly, Edmundo.
I will try to do my best. And one of them is that the notion that how you define the problem determines the possible solutions. I'm intrigued that you've started out by framing this whole thing as an individual obligation. And I think it's pretty limiting to focus on that without recognizing the thing that you just started to recognize, that there are global systems in place that have created this disparity that includes colonialism and all of the...
Edmundo, that's called a story arc. We kind of did part 1, part 2, part 3, so we weren't ignoring the global systems.
Okay. Well, then, so thank you for clarifying that piece, because the other 2 points then are, one is that I'm glad that you mentioned that the government, I think, has been turned on its head, where it was originally meant to be the instrument for the commonwealth of all the people. It has been appropriated by those very small percentage that is now using it as an instrument for taking away even more power. And we can't ignore that. Even as we need to make an attempt to try to change that system. There are individual things that we can do in the present time. And Edwin Burke, I think it was, who said that it is true that I am only one person, but I am one. And the fact that I cannot do everything will not prevent me from doing all that I can. So I think it's important to hold both that very specific way of intervening where I can, when I can, and also to work for the larger structure, that it doesn't matter if I don't change those larger social structures and systems of inequity that are in place here and globally, my individual effort will never be enough.
Edmundo, I'm really impressed with that citation from Edmund Burke. Now, are you a regular Edmund Burke reader?
Not a regular Edmund Burke reader, but bits and pieces here and there that I picked up from him.
Okay, well, thanks for your call.
So, Peter, what do you think?
No, I thought that was well said. I mean, I totally agree that the systems are important. If we can change the systems, we should. There are a lot of systems in the world in place now that are bad for the world's poorest nations, and we should try and do something about that politically. Subsidies, your caller actually mentioned corn subsidies, but what about cotton subsidies, which are even crazier than corn subsidies because they benefit fewer people and harm millions of small cotton growers in Africa.
Peter, I want to say, in your book, One World, you're actually kind of radical about this. You think... it's not clear to me, but you think it's one world. There's one economy, one atmosphere, one community, and you kind of argue that state sovereignty should be diminished in its role. I mean, are you kind of a cosmopolitan one world government kind of guy? Is that what you think ultimate justice requires?
Like the John Lennon thing you played, imagine. Yeah, imagine. It would be good. But at the moment, you may say that I'm a dreamer. I probably am. We're not ready for that yet. But yeah, I think we're starting to think that national sovereignty is less important than we used to think. I mean, after all, this government just intervened with an autonomous sovereign nation to overthrow the government. So presumably George Bush doesn't think that sovereignty is absolute. I don't know what he'd say if someone tried that on the United States, but So I think we are moving away.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly all these international institutions growing up, and I agree they could be strengthened. I'm not sure about the demise of state sovereignty, though. But on that note, we're going to have to say goodbye to you. It's been a real pleasure having you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, John. It's been great talking to you and your listeners.
Thank you, Peter. And we also want to thank all the callers. There were a lot of them this time we didn't get a chance to talk to, and the emailers we didn't get a chance to respond to.
Our guest has been Peter Singer of Princeton University, author of The President of Good and Evil, The Ethics of George W. Bush. I want to read that one. And One World, The Ethics of Globalization. I have read that one. So, John, what did we learn today?
Well, Peter Singer is a very well-known philosopher, very controversial about some things he believes or has at least stated about disabilities and so forth. But with respect to the issue of global aid and things like that, I've always thought his conclusions were very plausible, but maybe a bit more plausible than the theoretical apparatus he uses to defend them. Today I noticed he was kind of pushing that, from any ethical point of view, this is the right thing to do, as opposed to pushing just the utilitarianism.
Well, that's true. He's famous for being a utilitarian, the greatest good for the greatest number kind of principle. And in his book, you should read his book. It's a really easy, it's a good read. It's not highly technical, and it's deep and important stuff. He argues, whatever moral theory you adopt, just about, except I guess the Ayn Rand theory, you should help more. But I still think he underdoes country, family, the meaning to me of these particular attachments. I mean, the global moral community, there isn't really such a thing yet. He kind of admitted that, right? We live in a particular place at a particular time, and we don't want to be outsiders, strangers to that particular place and time.
Now, our listeners can find lots of discussion of Peter Singer's work. Just go to Amazon, and you don't have to buy your books from there, but just type in Peter Singer, and you'll see books by him, books about him, anthologies criticizing him, and anthologies supporting him. Another book on these issues is by another Peter Unger, called Living High and Letting Die, another great book with a similar message to much of Peter Singer's work.
And if you want to continue this conversation with us, go to our blog, theblog.philosophytalk.org, where our motto is Cogito Ergo Blogo. I think, therefore I blog. And here, with the last word on poverty and doing the right thing, Ian Scholes, the 60-second philosopher.
Ian Scholes, Jesus said in Mark 14, "The poor you will always have with you." But how did the poor become poor? The theory goes that when humans evolved from hunters and gatherers to farmers and began stockpiling food, some stockpiled more than others, so class and poverty were invented. In the early church, it was blessed to be poor. Good for the poor, one supposes, since their existence depended almost entirely on Christian charity. In the 16th century, Thomas Hobbes took a rather unchristian view of the poor. He wrote, "Riches are honorable, for they are power. Poverty, dishonorable." Hobbes took a deterministic view of humanity. Only an absolute sovereign can keep us from killing each other. In that worldview, the poor are just losers. Forget about it. Then came capitalism. Economist Adam Smith changed the Western view of wealth. Led by the rationalism of the 18th century, he gave the world the free marketplace. The impulse of self-interest, he believed, won't deliver a Hobbesian dog-eat-dog hell, but will improve the welfare of both rich and poor. A rising tide lifts all boats, you might say. As the Industrial Revolution spread and working conditions became horrific, economists became gloomier. Karl Marx believed in organizing workers as a political force. We've seen how that worked out. The 19th century also brought Darwinism and its evil twin, social Darwinism. The poor are poor because it's their fault. The young social sciences, ethnology, psychology, anthropology took their first baby steps in the 19th century, then made giant strides in the 20th, mainly in the fast-growing field of jargon, or if you prefer, technical terms. In the 50s, for instance, anthropologist Oscar Lewis identified what he called the culture of poverty. Cash economy, high unemployment, low wages. Gunnar Myrdal coined the term underclass in 1962 to identify Americans at the bottom of the labor market. The most hip term these days is social exclusion, coined by Brené Lenoir in 1974, about those excluded from employment-based social security systems. We now have a bewildering array of approaches to poverty, from the right, who at the most extreme feel poor people could all be rich if they just applied themselves, and the left, who at their most extreme feel poor people are all doomed to be poor because the rich are keeping them down. Types of poverty are constantly being identified. Depth of poverty, duration of poverty, absolute poverty, relative poverty, income poverty, childhood poverty, consistent poverty, relative income poverty, same-degree poverty. We have those at risk of poverty, working poor, homeless, underemployed, exploited, illegal immigrants, disenfranchised, lazy, marginalized, chronically unemployed, victims, welfare shirkers, deserving poor, and those who only need a bootstrap. Currently, global summits and vast non-government organizations like the World Bank have turned their mighty gaze on poverty. It is possible that poverty will disappear in our lifetime. Well, poverty itself might not disappear, but we'll definitely keep finding new names for it. I suspect the socially excluded you will always have with you. I gotta go.
Wow, Ken, my head is dizzy from 60 seconds of rapid-fire philosophy.
If your head is dizzy, that means you've got a conundrum in your mind, and we can solve it for you, can't we, John?
Yes. Go to our webpage,
conundrums@philosophytalk.org, or hit that conundrums button on the webpage. We won't promise to solve your problem, but we will give you lots of new ways to think about it.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University.
Our executive producer is Gordon Earl.
Special thanks to Dave Fusaro, Nicole Sawaya, Ben Temshin, and Alan Farley.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from the Pacific Division of the American Philosophical Association and from various groups at Stanford University.
And even more support from the Friends of Philosophy Talk and from the members of KALW Information Radio San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed in this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our funders.
The conversation continues on our website, www.philosophytalk.org. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.